Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good everything. All right. I have my coffee here. Let's jump right into it. It is a wonderful Monday. We have another coffee and dev. You get to grow as a developer and the time it takes to drink our lovely coffee, how we start Monday. Usually we do this every Monday and Friday. It's typically around 8:45 a.m. Eastern time. And today's topic is about developer to manager. It's kind of been a buildup of the other episodes. If you watch some, we've talked about um, salary negotiations. We've talked about interviews, depending on the level you're going for. We talked about interview resources like preparation and books, and some of that on the last episode covered some manager or management books. And with that said, I wanted to talk about developer to manager and how it's really a different track and not a promotion. Um, if you are at a company that doesn't have tracks, this is definitely something you should talk about with your management team or your exec team. There should be a clear path that you don't need to go into management to progress in your career. Typically, they're called ICs, individual contributor tracks. So you'll go like your normal levels of developer, like software engineer one and like two, three, and then you'll have some sort of like senior level. And then typically, this is where it starts to branch out. So you'll either have like an architecture path, you'll have like a staff engineer, you'll have like a system operations kind of path, like on the DevOps side. It really kind of depends, but those are still more on the development side. Then you look and you'll have the management side, which will have more like your technical lead, which is sort of still mostly technical, but you have some management roles, very little. Or you'll have a team lead, which is kind of the opposite, which is more heavy on the management side and some very minor technical. And then you obviously, if you progress on the management track, it's going to be more like a software development manager, director, etc. as you go down the management path. So it's definitely not a promotion. It's a different skill set. It's entirely different. It's not just staying as the technical side anymore. If you're an individual contributor looking to go to a manager, you should be asking yourself why. What's going to change? What are you looking for? Are you happy still writing code? Are you going to be happy not writing code as much? Do you like and enjoy meetings? Because if you don't like meetings, then you should probably stay in the IC track because the manager side, you have just more meetings with how it works. Like if you just factor out like a team of, let's say, 6 to 8 people, and if you're a manager, now you're responsible for doing the one-on-ones. And even if you're spending an hour a week with each of your reportees, that's 6 to 8 hours a week that's already taken up on just meetings. And then factor in like follow-ups or unscheduled one-on-ones or coaching throughout the week or questions or interactions with the team, Bob doesn't get along with John, etc. Like time fills to fill that. Meetings will fill up the time, and as well as like that's not the other stuff, which is interfacing with other departments, other teams. Product is a big thing. You're going to spend a lot of time in the management side dealing with product a lot more on the strategic and what's the initiative and visibility and things like this. So it's entirely different track is what I'm going to leave it at. But some skills can be translated. It's not a whole restart, especially if you look at the skills you have and you try and find ways to leverage them over to management. Like it's as a developer, you're going to have certain skills around like organization and structure and process, which is good on the management side because if you think about it, think of it's like weird to say, but if you're a developer, think more like a manager. And if you're a manager, think more like a developer. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, if you're on the development side, if you just thought like a manager, you would progress your career substantially because you would be looking for things like measurability, visibility, um, impact to the business. Now, as a manager, if you're thinking more like a developer, you'll do really well because you're going to be things like repeatability, onboarding time, process, like the equivalent of a pull request for managers. How do I know if this process is good or not good? Um, because in the coding world as devs, we always get that feedback. You simply open up a pull request with any peer in the company, you're like, how good is my code? And the manager side, that's a lot harder. It takes really good peers to have those kind of conversations and level up yourselves between each other to go, hey, I did blah, blah, blah in my team. Like, what do you think of that? And someone can pull you aside and be like, that's not good. That's garbage. Or here's a different process. Or have you thought about the impact on XYZ? So, the skills that translate are not what most people think. Like I said, it's more applying the development philosophy and the tools that you would normally take as a developer over to the manager side. Um, so like I said, like the pull request stuff works really well. If you come in with the mentality of like, how do I get better as a developer? You could say like, okay, read, learn, shorter feedback cycle, and like the pull request as I had mentioned. And then you just apply the same thinking, the system level thinking over to management, which is how do I become better manager or manage my team better? And you go, okay, the same things like shorter feedback cycle, feedback, pull requests, look for other ways, resources, reading, etc. So not all is lost. I think a lot of people make the jump and then they think it's a total new thing. Like you have to start from zero. And while it's a new thing, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to start from zero. There are some skills to translate. Honestly, I think more than people give credit for because they think it's all just soft skills. And there is truth to that. But I mean, you have some level of soft skills as a developer too. There are some levels of politics as a developer, right? You have to convince people into your technical decisions at some level. So now it's just instead of these always being just technical decisions, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's project level, sometimes it's cross team dependencies, convincing like, hey, I need resources from this team at this moment. Still kind of similar. So the biggest change though is to realize this maker schedule versus manager schedule. The maker schedule as a developer is you're going to have very few meetings, and the meetings you have are probably just like at the end of the day or at the start of the day, and then you have giant blocks of time to put your head down and code out some stuff or ponder, whatever design decision you have. The manager schedule is sporadic. It is filled with a ton of interruptions, ton of different meetings. Very like you don't have these long, nice 3-hour stretches of like, hey, great, I'm going to read documentation and implement XYZ. It's more like, oh, I'm like double booked on this 2-hour section, and now I need to move the whole schedule around to fit this in, and I got 30 minutes to find spot for like lunch and whatnot. And I'm not saying it's just always packed schedule. It's just the time you have to sit down and do necessarily deep work and not the shallow level garbage is really infrequent. So a tip here is for developers going to managers is to book time in your calendar for this, is protect your calendar. Um, Protect your lunches too. The first thing you do when you join a new company, I tell people just book your lunchtime. Like first thing you do, open up your calendar, reoccurring event from 12 to 1 or 1 to 2 or whatever your lunch period is, and then do the same thing for some form of deep work. So like at least once a week, you're going to have a section where you have like this 3-hour chunk of time that's really yours, and you can trade it off. Like you always have this 3-hour buffer somewhere in your calendar that, hey, if something does come up that week, like someone comes on your team is like, I need to talk to you this week, something's really important. No, it can't wait for my one-on-one. Or if you're doing like one-on-ones bi-weekly, or you just had the one-on-one, you always have this section on your calendar where you're like, hey, I can fit that in. Something major happens in the company, restructure, reorg, new product, a product deadlines get slipped, or hey, the board needs XYZ. Okay, you have this small time buffer in your calendar that you always know that like, hey, I don't need to cancel a bunch of my one-on-ones to fit this in my calendar, and I can still meet my commitments. So protect your schedule, but it is a different schedule. Just realize that you're not going to have as many frequent 3-hour stretches anymore. So, with that said, we can't get crazy into the weeds on this topic. There's so much. So these are the resources that I will recommend. The Manager's Path is a great book, I think, especially on the software skills and behavioral stuff. Radical Candor is actually another one. That was the book I was trying to remember this morning, which I couldn't remember until we started talking about it. High Output Management from Andrew Grove, I think, or Andy Grove. And that was like the CEO of Intel. And he talks just about building up process and good feedback and trying to build out teams that perform well. There's incentive structure in there, how not everything is just focused on necessarily just money. That's not the only factor. What gets teams to be driven and how do you measure that and how Intel was able to do it. Leading Snowflakes is overall a really good book. It's on Amazon. You just Google Leading Snowflake, like software manager, you'll get it. It's definitely a good overall book. I don't feel like it goes extremely in depth on anything, like really, really into detail on like this is the end all be all on one-on-ones. It's more like, hey, you're a manager and you want to know generally the processes that you should be following and what are good things to have. And it's kind of like a checklist book. It's not really actually a checklist. Like the book is not like do A, do B, do C. It's more like a checklist in the sense of you reading, you're like, okay, I know I should be doing X, I know I should be doing Y. Here's improvements. Oh, I didn't know about that kind of style book. The Systems and Engineering Management book is a book I have not read. I have read Staff Engineering, which is another book I could recommend, but this is more on the technical leadership path and less so more the management path. But it's the same author, and I did go through the Kindle version, just scrolling through, and it looks like a very, very, very good book. So I will update in the future on how well it is. But like I said, it's the same author. This book was excellent. Highly recommend. My last video I did talks about this book as a resource for interviewing. They've released, or Will has released, the author, Will has released one called Systems of Engineering Management, which I think is more focused on the leadership aspect and like the direct management aspect, and less so like the technical leadership, more like the management leadership. And like I said, I scrolled through, it looks really well written, and I'm going to recommend it. And with that said, that's really it for Coughing and Dev. I know this is much shorter and we didn't go so much into the weeds, but I want you to just keep in mind that, you know, it's a different path. You need to consider how it's going to affect it. You need to get the resources. It's not as simple as just switching your title and, hey, you're a manager. And it's such a large conversation that this is just the intro. It's just a start. Let's get you the resources so you can start going down the rabbit hole and figuring out things on your own. But until next Coffee and Dev, and the next episode, maybe we'll cover more of this. Enjoy your coffee. I hope you learned a little bit more today than last week. Until next time, adios.